Good morning, Wayne. Happy to hear from you last night that you will be at Jerry World this Sunday to watch your Packers against my Cowboys from a box up next to Jerry Jones's box at Jerry World. Emperor versus Emperor. But right now it is time to skip the BS, time for Undisputed, time to talk national championship game. In a few minutes, we will get to Mike McCarthy on the hot seat, Jordan Love turning into, yikes, Michael Jordan, John Morant, gone again, and Aaron Rodgers, all-time hypocrite. But first up, it is Michigan 34, Washington 13. Jim Harbaugh got suspended to begin and to end this season, and now his team is 15-0, national champs. Weird game, misleading final score, but to me, Michigan was just ultimately too physically dominant in both the offensive and defensive lines. But let's see what Keyshawn Johnson and my friend Robert Smith have to say about all that. Robert, of course, is an NFL analyst for Fox, but for years he covered and studied college football, and nobody I know has a sharper eye for football than Robert does. He, of course, played college football at Ohio State before making Pro Bowls at running back for the Vikings, but trust me, Robert is about to give you a completely objective opinion of what rival Michigan just achieved. Mr. Smith, good morning to you and welcome to Undisputed. And how did you see last night's championship game?
Well, you know, Denny Green was my coach with the Minnesota Vikings.
Yep.
And he used to always say when we lost the game, to the victors, go the Mary Franklin spoils, you know, with slightly different language, right?
I
and the victors were certainly valiant last night. And I think you're absolutely right. You know, just too dominant offensive line, defensive line. I mean, geez, what a performance in that first half. I mean, those long runs. And I think Washington really got exposed. They would have been the lowest ranked total defense to win a national championship in the BCS era. They got really exposed. You can see on these runs right here, they just really didn't have any speed at the second and third level of that defense. And you know what Jim Harbaugh wanted to do? He wanted to go with these heavy sets, go play action, and grind the clock out. And of course, Washington just wasn't able to convert on the opportunities that they did have. I think it definitely hurt Michael Penix's draft stock in some of the throws that he had last night, some of those opportunities, but there just weren't enough of them. We'll get a little bit more into the details of what Michigan has done defensively, but I think that's the thing that we've seen from Jim Harbaugh in Michigan. Coaches need to be coachable, right? They have to figure out where it is that they're deficient. And after 5 straight losses to Ohio State to open his career, he knew that he needed to make some changes, and he did.
He did.
Bully ball, Robert. You know, that's basically what it boiled down to. It's like you mentioned, the offensive, defensive lines, controlling the line of scrimmage, patient running by Edwards and looking at the hole. You played the position. He was not in there, getting in there fast. He was very patient in picking his spots, long home run hitters early in the game. But when you look at these two conferences, the Pac-12 conference and the Big Ten, we got 4 teams that are now going to go over to the Big Ten conference in USC, UCLA, Washington, and Oregon. Well, you saw exactly last night what could happen to you if your interior lines are not up to snuff. In the Pac-12 conference, as you know, historically, we like to throw the ball all over the lot. We don't like to muddy it up and beat up the line of scrimmage. It's just something that I don't know why that's been the case for so many years now. But until that changes on these 4 teams that's going into the Big Ten Conference, when you play Ohio State, Penn State, in Michigan, maybe Wisconsin gets back into the running game at some point in time, this is what you're going to see in that conference. You're going to see a physicality versus a finesse. And I think going into the game, we all knew that this is what Jim Harbaugh is going to do. He's going to play action. He's going to run the football. He's going to run it some more. He's going to play action. He's going to run until something finally hits. We knew what Michael Penix in Washington Huskies was going to do. They're going to try to throw the football with their receivers, and it just didn't work out. The two styles didn't work at all, Skip.
No. But
remember who was in the Pac-12 with strong offensive and defensive line play though until 2015. It was Jim Harbaugh, right? When he was at Stanford. And what he had one of my favorite lines ever when he was at Stanford. He said, "We're going to win with 2 things, character and cruelty." Ooh. And he brought that same mentality. It just took him time. It took him time to catch up from a talent perspective to Ohio State. I think that was the biggest part of it. But he did all kinds of, he's quirky. All the lines about, if worms had guns, birds wouldn't be afraid of them, which I still don't quite understand. The satellite camps. He did all the foreign trips. He's just kind of done it all. And now, the calculated endorsement of revenue sharing. I mean, he's smart, man. He knows what to do. But I think the biggest thing that he did defensively, he went from that blitzing, attacking style. Remember what he had? He had Don Brown, Dr. Blitz, as they called him all those years. But he went to John Harbaugh and he said, "Hey, man, I need some help on the defensive side of the ball." So they brought over Mike McDonald, and then Jesse Minter came in. Mike McDonald, hey, it worked out so well. He's like, okay, Mike McDonald, I need him with the Ravens. So he brought Jesse Minter in, and this key in the NFL, kind of what we've seen, that Vic Fangio style. We're going to play softer on the back end. We're going to have at least 2 safeties back there a lot of the time. And Washington just wasn't able to make them pay when they were sitting back there in those high safety looks. But they dialed back some of the pressure. But if you're going to do that, you got to be great up front. And Graham and the boys along that defensive line, although the sack numbers weren't huge, they were applying pressure to Michael Penix, forcing him into quick decisions.
Yeah, they had 18 pressures last night, and they knocked him around. And the one play that started the second half, I think that Michael's ankle got stuck underneath, and it wasn't right. I think his ribs got jarred and probably injured. And yet, quick point about the overall stats of this football game. If I had told you yesterday, going into this game, that Michigan would go 1 of 10 on third down, if I told you yesterday that Washington would run 71 plays to only 57 for Michigan and would win the time of possession, what would you have told me yesterday? You would have said, oh, it's a battle, right? But you wouldn't know that Washington went 2 of 14 on third down. But the point was, the damage that Michigan did running the football mostly came in just the first quarter on just 3 plays, right? If we could see those
150 yards on 3 plays,
149 on these 3. If we could see them all in a row, just to see what happened. Donovan Edwards got loose. He hadn't gotten loose really all year. I hadn't even noticed him all year, and that's just a non-wrap up. He bounces it out and escapes for a touchdown. So that one goes for 41, and then here he goes again. That's just gaping hole, obliterated at point of attack, and that's 49 more yards.
You look at that separation on the second and third level of the defense. That's what really stood out to me.
Look at Blake Corum outrun the corner. Yeah.
Oh, it was great to see Corum. I had an opportunity to interview him last year, right before he tore his ACL.
Oh, good.
Tore his ACL late in the season, missed a couple of games, and came back strong. Man, I was happy to see him do what he was able to do. But that second and third level of the defense, just no speed for Washington, and that's why they had the number of close games that they had this year, because that defense just wasn't really up to stuff, and they were able to cover it up.
Robert, can Blake Corum play pro football? At what level? What's his ceiling in pro football? How good can he be?
I don't know how good he can be, but I think he can definitely play pro football. I don't think he's going to be like a Mike Hart and flame out. One of the things that I saw from him, which I think it's the hardest thing to learn as a running back, and I think, Keyshawn, you had already mentioned it. You talk about that patience, really late cuts, really pushing the line of scrimmage. You could see really setting up his blocks, moving wide, setting back, but making those second and third cuts. He's one of those kind of guys that just has a natural feel at the second and third level of the defense, is kind of where safeties are approaching, where he needs to make those extra cuts to turn those 15-yarders into 30 and 40-yarders.
Yeah.
And 59 last night.
I covered Emmitt Smith, obviously. I see a little bit of Emmitt in Blake, in that they're both obviously short, stout, incredible sort of underrated quickness in tight spaces, and also underrated acceleration, because Blake can hit whatever his top speed is. I don't know what he'll time in the 40. I think he'll be in the 4.4-ish range, somewhere in there. Maybe not Robert Smith fast, but
you're lucky you don't have Michael Irvin on the set. He'd be yelling at you right now for any Emmitt Smith comparison. But
there's some there, because he's hard to find behind the mammoth offensive line. You can't find him until he's into your second level, and all of a sudden it's like, where is he? How can we get him on the ground? And he's hard to get on the ground.
Yeah, and we saw it, with your Cowboys, picking up Deuce Vaughn. Now, he's obviously a bigger back, doesn't quite have the suddenness that a Deuce Vaughn has, but he has more power. So I think his game's going to translate to the NFL level.
Yeah.
Like, what's his ceiling going to be? A lot of times that's what pieces you have around you, what that offensive line looks like, and, how dangerous your pass threat is.
And if I can get 4.5 yards of pop out of a guy like that, I'm not asking him to hit a home run every time,
But he can move. He can get loose. I see him get. You saw it on the 59-yarder. Okay, let's take a quick look at early in the second quarter. Michael Penix has a chance to make this a real live football game because his guy Rome Odunze gets open, and they're kind of on the wrong page, but he is wide open. Keyshawn, what did you see here?
Well, he's not ready to throw. Yeah. He's open, but Penix isn't ready to throw. And what happens in these situations when you uncover